fifth episode of the Beirut Banyan, and we're joined by Nadim Shehadi, Executive Director of Lebanese American University, New York campus. First part of the episode discusses sectarianism and secularism and their history in the region. The second part, beginning at 52 minutes and 45 seconds, discusses civil marriage. And Nadim's opinions on sectarianism and civil marriage may surprise you. This conversation is born out of many discussions I've had with Nadim over the years, from sidewalk cafes in Hamra to university campuses, Boston, New York, Beirut. Nadim unpacks academic terms and offers historical perspective on Beirut's place in Ottoman history and the power-sharing mechanism Lebanon inherited and holds on to relentlessly. We found our niche.
We did?
I think so.
What is it?
Well, I'd like to say it's contrarian debates.
Yes, I didn't expect you to expose me like this at the very beginning of a podcast. My main idea is that I think that there is nothing more tyrannical than received wisdom and accepted idea. When people are convinced of something beyond any debate, then it becomes a very dangerous sort of set of ideas. And I like to cast doubt on everything. I think that's better than being contrarian.
I like your choice of words. Yeah. Danger, doubt. Maybe those are even more explicit than contrarianism.
Yes.
But nonetheless, these are very challenging issues, and I think in a way there's many different angles to look at one issue in the region. And if you don't mind, maybe we can start with something rather general. And I think it leads back to a discussion we had not too long ago, which was the heaviness of the term sectarianism.
Yes. And
maybe we can actually start off at the decade that we were discussing, which was the Ottoman liberalism, Tanzimat phase, in particular the 1860s. And you said something which was quite astonishing. And if you don't mind, I will quote you here. You can draw two lines from the Tanzimat era.
Right. One to
Ataturk and one to Erdogan.
Yes.
Now let's start there. What exactly?
Well, you can also draw it to most of the countries in the region. You can draw one to Sisi and one to Morsi. in a way. So first of all, it's not really Ottoman liberalism. Liberalism it's more cosmopolitan, if you like, than liberal. And the Ottomans in the 1820s and early 30s panicked about, mainly after the Greek revolt. They thought that the state of the empire was needed reform, and that in order to prevent another revolt like in the Balkans or the Arabs, or in order to keep the empire together, they had to introduce what they called the Tanzimat, which are reforms which were mainly administrative, but also included the Western concept of equality. So they wanted people to feel that there is equality of citizenship in the empire, and that they had the full rights in the empire. They wanted people to feel that they belonged to the empire.
And can I ask you, what is that pulled from? If these are notions of equality, and you said earlier even Ottoman cosmopolitanism, is that something that you're linking towards Europe in those years and European ideals, or is this?
Yes, it was largely inspired by European ideas, by some Republican even ideas of citizenship.
And that equality, is there anything secular about that equality?
No, at the time there was nothing. It was not secular. but it gave a kind of autonomy to the various groups in the empire.
Yeah.
So the Christians, the Greeks, the Armenians, or yeah.
And going back to those lines,
Yes.
so we have, if it's not Erdogan or Ataturk or Sisi and Mursi, let's say any of these two parallel trajectories, how does that, what does equality sort of mean in terms of those lines? Are we saying that?
Okay, so basically, at the time, there was protest from Muslims or Islamists that you cannot give minorities the same rights as full-blooded Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, and there were protests about the reforms on religious grounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, this was in a way a healthy phenomenon.
Yeah.
But this was, if you like, this was speeded up after World War I.
Mm-hmm.
So it went through ups and downs, but
so the natural trajectory was interrupted.
no, Ataturk in a way fast-tracked the
Mm-hmm.
whole thing
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
adopted almost overnight a secular Western constitution which was inspired more by the French and the Swiss. It was like laïque
Yes.
rather than secular,
Mm-hmm.
which is equality of citizenship.
Yeah.
But it encompasses a denial of diversity.
Denial of diversity.
Yes. So, for example, in France is a very diverse country. You have the Basque, the Breton, the Provençal, Alsace-Lorraine are more or less German. You have a huge diversity of people, and the French have a system where everybody becomes French. And that's laïcité, where you have one single identity, which is secular, where the government almost defines what religion is and the limits of religion. And it's the hegemony of the state over religion. It's not really separation of the state, and it's the hegemony of the state over everything. It's you become a citizen. And all diversity is almost forcibly eradicated through education.
Now this,
So you bring a diverse population, you put them through a system called the lycée,
Yes.
and you crank it just like that, and they come out homogeneous on the other side, and you have something called the Académie Française,
Yes.
which tells you what the language really is, and you're not allowed to have different accents and all that. So this was an inspiration to Ataturk. Overnight, he abolished even the clothes of you were not allowed to wear you had to wear European clothes. You couldn't wear the tarbouche.
Yes.
He changed the script
To your Latin script.
yeah. And he formed a commission to purify the language,
Right.
to reform the language.
But can I ask you, if this is a problematic issue
Yeah.
facing our part of the world, is it simply the pace that it was implemented? Because it almost sounds like it's personally driven, and that is the problem. It's the fast forward post-World War I, not enough time to adjust. Is that the issue, or is the secularism in itself problematic to you?
To me personally, it is secularism itself.
This is interesting. So
Yes.
secularism has a negative connotation
To me,
to
yes.
you.
To me, secular nationalism, the homogenizing secular nationalist ideology that prevailed in the 20th century and that everybody accepts as an ideal form, where diversity is in a way, seen as a negative, and anything traditional is seen as a negative. So it's also modernizing.
Would it be fair to say that the European example is maybe not considered so problematic when other alternatives are offered? In other words, would France be better off with a less secular society today? Is France in a maybe a not crippled, but let's say stunted state because of its secularism?
Well, the whole of Europe is moving away slightly. I mean, from that model, because now in France and in Spain they are recognizing the differences. There are regional differences, and you're allowed to speak your language. You're allowed to teach it. So there is a gradual movement away from it.
So the core issue is autonomy then?
The core issue is the role of the state, I think, in my view.
Yes. I'm more interested in your...
Yeah.
Yes.
So in my view, the core issue is how much do you allow the state to control your life? And I think that what we are going through globally now, the global crisis that we're going through, which has many symptoms, one of them is the Arab Spring, but the rise of populism everywhere is the same phenomenon as the Arab Spring.
The populism and the Arab Spring to you are
very similar. Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
How would you? Could you maybe probe that a little bit?
So the 20th century. For me, started in the 1870s.
Is Steve Bannon our guy for the?
No. Steve Bannon is a nationalist and anti-migration and all that. I think he's also a reaction to that. You see, there is a confusion between the reaction and the phenomenon. If you have people calling for more nationalism,
yes,
it doesn't mean that nationalism is on the increase. It means that nationalism is under threat. So they're calling for. Otherwise, they wouldn't call for it.
Right.
You see, so the Steve Bannon ultra-nationalist phenomenon is a symptom of the decline of that phenomenon, rather than a symptom of its.
So he is
strength.
not in that orbit. The populism of.
Let me put it this way.
Yeah.
In 2011, there were demonstrations everywhere.
Yeah.
There were demonstrations in Beijing, in Romania,
Ukraine.
in Spain, in Ukraine.
Yeah.
There was Occupy Wall Street, Occupy St. Paul, Occupy Portland, Oregon. There was an alignment of the stars which caused a popular explosion in the streets, protesting. What were they protesting? I don't think they were sure. They knew something was wrong, but some of them were blaming the bankers, like Wall Street and St. Paul's. Others were blaming immigrants. Others were blaming politicians in general, the establishment. They were just basically, or globalization, or what you had is people feeling that their world or the order they lived in is no longer appropriate, and it was crumbling. It was not responding to their needs.
And that is part of the secular order that we're referring.
So for me, that's that order that's crumbling is a 20th century order where the state had gained too much control over people's lives, and this is inspired by movements that began in the 1870s. Most of the ideas of the 20th century were germinating in the 1870s. So for me, the 20th century started in 1870 1871 to be precise, and the fall of Paris to Bismarck, and ended in 2011.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And our part of the world is included in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're not an exception.
Right.
We were part of most of the trends, the nationalist trends, the socialist trends, the welfare.
But I'd like to push a bit on that notion that we're part of the general trend. The state control in our part of the world was vastly different than the state control of West Germany, the UK, etc., America. We had a vicious form of state control, which maybe you disagree with this. I'd like your opinion on the level of secularism that applied to our part of the world was perhaps less secular, more tyrannical, more state abuse. So, in other words, Ataturk was more a dictator than a secular leader. And post Ataturk, all of our leaders have been more dictator than secular, liberal, European-oriented. And you may disagree, but
it was not the separation of state and church and state. It was the hegemony of the state over the church.
So state control over all aspects of life.
All aspects of life. And this was, in a way, inspired by Prussia, by the Bismarck's social insurance system and social services, and by a lot of the ideas around then, which included eugenics, which included nationalism, which included the state control of
right. But again, are we just part of the club? Are we like
we are, I think we're very much part of the club, yes, because we were we had most of these ideas. I mean, we followed most of the global trends.
Yes.
I mean, don't forget that.
Because when the Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street, to me, seemed like different planets altogether.
Yes.
When you have Tahrir, and then you have anti-Wall Street New Yorkers showing up and camping, they don't seem to be the same to me. Although they are both protesting, they're both expressing anger towards their state, but the relationship to the state is vastly different. An Egyptian in 2009, 2010, and a New Yorker the same years have very different experiences.
Of course, yeah.
So is it really to do with the state that they are both challenging the 20th century order? Or is our part of the world just, in a way, going back to what was accelerated too quickly at the turn of the century? And are we picking up where we, in a way, left off, which is what we're referring to at the beginning? That cosmopolitanism, that diversity, that equality of later 19th century Ottoman Empire.
It was not equal.
But it was becoming more equal.
No, it was still unequal. It was still unequal, and
to the religious minorities that you mentioned.
Yes, religious minorities were second class.
Yes,
there's no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to the drawing board. Mm-hmm. You have many positively loaded words which represent values, yes, which are dominant in the 20th century. So, equality, cohesiveness, homogeneity, citizenship, liberalism, nationalism, patriotism, all these were freedom, liberty, all that. Now, it's not necessary that they are all compatible. There is always a trade-off between one and the other. So you have to have a hierarchy of values.
Right.
Which values do you value over others? So would you trade off liberty or freedom for equality?
And to you, you can't have both.
or national, or patriotism, or nationalism.
Yeah.
Maybe you can, but throughout the 20th century, there was always that trade-off.
Interesting.
Your choices became more and more limited, and your freedom became more and more limited for the sake of equality.
Which we never properly had.
No, in our region, it was for the sake of nationalism and for the sake of patriotism.
But that's my point, really, that nationalism trumped everything else.
In our region.
In our region.
But it is part of the same system. You see, post-World War I, don't forget that Europe went through, people say that post-World War I, Sykes-Picot and Versailles and all that created, this whole myth of lines in the sand and artificial states, and that's all Arab nationalist, gibberish for me. Yeah, because basically, you have three empires that collapsed during World War I. The Russian, the Ottoman, and the Austro-Hungarian.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
So these empires were empires that ruled over several nations, which meant that if you went to any of the cities, you would have many nations, which is what cosmopolitanism is. When you go to Smyrna, to Beirut, to Alexandria, to
Sarajevo,
Constantinople, to Sarajevo, you would find Greeks, Armenians, Turks, Europeans, Albanians, Georgians, a huge variety of Maltese. They were all mixed, and Arabs, of course, so you had a cosmopolitan world ruled by the empire and the Turks, and this was not a world of equals. So the diversity. If you value diversity versus equality, let me put it in a nutshell. In order for Turkey to become homogeneous and cohesive, you had the Armenian massacres, the expulsion of Greeks, the expulsion of Arabs from the south, which people don't even mention.
That's true.
The Assyrian massacres,
subjugation of Kurds and
subjugation of Kurds.
Yeah.
So after you've done all that, okay, you become secular and you become homogeneous and you become cohesive. I'd rather not. They say that Christians were persecuted in the Ottoman Empire, and that they were second-class citizens. So there were maybe 8 million Christians in Turkey in what we call now Turkey in Ottoman times, who were unequal. Now there are 80,000 Christians in Turkey who are equal.
But okay, so I'll take your point that an accelerated form of secularism purged communities that considered the Ottoman Empire their home.
But you see, it's not accelerated. It's the same process happened in Europe, and it happened through centuries. The European wars created Westphalia created we don't want to go back all that far.
But
Westphalia created principalities and states that were homogeneous, and these were carved up by wars and ethnic cleansing and expulsion of people and massacres and all that. So the homogeneity of Europe is of the states in Europe.
Yes.
The fact that you could at one time, now it's all very different, but you could find Danes in Denmark and Swedes in Sweden and only Germans in Germany and French in France.
So
this is a result of a long process of wars and religious wars and national wars
so in other words, what I'm getting from you is, rather than secularism being the positive instinct, it should be sectarianism.
No, I'm just saying that you cannot accept secularism and positively loaded values, which I acknowledge are positively loaded. I mean, I'm a secular person. I'm not a religious person, so I don't.
And we're doing this in a very secular city.
And a secular institution.
And we're both products of a secular institution.
Absolutely.
In Lebanon.
Yes.
We're very secular.
Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that there is a limit to how much these values can be useful or harmful, or to what extent they can be harmful.
Now let's flip this on its head. Sectarianism.
Yes.
Rather than that being a negative term, would you say that sectarianism has its positive traits and those go back?
Okay, sectarianism is a negatively loaded term. It is in a world where we value unity and homogeneity and cohesiveness, sectarianism is bad.
And Lebanon is the shining star.
Lebanon is
the sectarianism.
Yeah, but you see, you call it sectarianism in Lebanon when you are against the system. So in Lebanon there's now a very vociferous movement to change the system, and they call it sectarianism, but in fact it's not. It's a power sharing, a system of power sharing that is inspired.
That's interesting.
By the Ottoman Model.
So we are closer to the 1870s than other places, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, we never. So, if in a nutshell, Lebanon never became a 20th century ideal state.
Sure.
Lebanon skipped the 20th century.
Lebanon skipped the 20th century, but we were very brutal.
We skipped. No, during the 20th century, we spent the whole century arguing whether we wanted to become.
It's my fault for taking the conversation to the 21st century, but it's still a good conversation.
No, you see, so Lebanon is an exception in the sense that we never became an ideal type 20th century state, which has equal citizenship, which is sovereign, which gives services to its population. All these 20th century sort of ideal types were never achieved. So in a way, we skipped the 20th century and spent the whole century arguing whether to enter it or not. All our crises, whether 1930, 1926, the Constitution, 1975, all these crises were about that. And
the Civil War is part of us joining the...
Absolutely. What was the Civil War about? The Civil War, if you look at the program of the Haraka al-Wataniyya and of the progressive nationalist forces in Lebanon, they were very similar to the program of the revolution in 1958, and it's not and they were about abolishing the confessional system, becoming a strong state, fighting, having a strong army, fighting Israel, supporting the Arab nationalist causes.
It wasn't our sectarian model that drove us to that point?
Well, that's one explanation. But the flip side of that was that we had a sectarian model, which you call sectarian model because you
you're right. You're right. For this conversation, I'm going to change the word because you're right. It does have. I am automatically assuming that negative side. So why don't we? What would you call it instead of sectarian?
Well, it's a confessional power sharing model.
I remember us once using consociational, and you didn't like that word.
Yes, because it's a term which is used by so-called political scientists, which I'm allergic to.
Which you don't consider yourself one of the in that field that because you are of course.
No, I'm not a social scientist.
Sure, yeah,
certainly not.
So what would the
because social science, you see, social science. Look at the words.
Yes.
What is social science? Social science is a very 20th century form of thinking in a way, and it is also inspired by Prussia and Bismarck.
So
I'm not anti-Prussia or Bismarck, but it is. But the impulse came from the victory of Prussia over France.
So on the bottom of your respect list, we have the secular social scientist, and at the top we have an Ottoman cosmopolitan. Power sharing leader. Well, I mean, I'm trying to see to you.
Yes.
If sectarian is assuming sectarian has that bad side.
Yes.
Power sharing may not be that word, right? We wouldn't just say power sharing. Confessional is closer to what you would want.
Yeah, I mean, this is what it's another way of using it.
Okay, so the confessional model we had, or we still have, is sort of away from the problems that we got ourselves into in the 20th century.
It's not totally divorced, because if the objective was to reach the 20th century model, then the power sharing system was a problem.
Then in that case, why is it so? I mean, social scientists aside, why is it so mainstream to refer to our problems as sectarian in nature? Why do you think that?
I think it's wrong to say.
Because we're not all social scientists. I mean, the average person the average protester, who maybe leans more towards a secular model by default. How does that person play a role in this? Because I'm curious. I don't think the average person sees the sectarian confessional system as a good thing.
No.
So why
do you think they mix? There's a confusion of issues. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So clientelism is bad. There's no question about it. Yes. Corruption is bad,
which we have plenty of.
Lack of organization, lawlessness, all these issues are bad. All these are bad. There's no question about that. But it doesn't mean that if you abolish sectarianism, you'll abolish all this. You can still have sectarianism. You can still have
corruption,
and lack of services and clientelism. I mean, the best example is the Palestinian Authority. I mean, they have a very good excuse because they are under occupation. But basically, the corruption that exists there and the clientelism and the inefficiency and it's very similar to ours, but they don't have a sectarian
without the sectarianism.
Without sectarianism, so you can have that without the sectarianism.
So we are illogically linking the
if you hear people in Lebanon speaking, it's a focus on sectarianism that if you abolish the confessional system in Lebanon, the power sharing system, and we all become secular, a la 20th century.
But not in its most brutal form. Let's not go to the, Holocaust and
Yes.
and Armenian genocide. Let's just say
No, but you see, it depends which side you're on. People who are secularists in the ideological sense will not blame these ideas for, say, what's happening in Syria.
Right.
They will blame sectarianism for what's happening in Syria. So you do have two sides.
So, in other words, the clientelism you mentioned, or the mafia sort of like behavior, is less to do with the sectarian model and more to do with poor governance.
Yeah.
And that's the issue at hand.
Yeah. I mean, a crook is a crook, whether he's sectarian or secular, he's a crook.
Interesting. It took me through all the stages almost of why sectarianism should not be the worst model. I still have that reaction.
Yes.
And even changing the word, it still takes me to that negative reaction, whether it's confessional or anything else.
Yeah.
And I think it's largely because of the positive side of secularism that is very attractive.
What is the positive side of secularism?
Well, I could be wrong in my assumption here, but the things that I enjoy the most in that part of the world, I think, are less religious and more secular. And I'll give you an example. Something like this university,
Yes.
which is not a sectarian. There's nothing sectarian about this university.
Yeah.
AUB is the same.
Yes.
And the like. My interactions in Beirut and
You
Lebanon.
are a Ras Beiruti, basically. Yeah.
And
Yes.
probably why I like you as well. But yeah, sure. And that to me is that it may be a bubble, it may be irrelevant, the wider Middle East, but I think I find myself attracted to that lifestyle.
Yeah.
That is a model that I
No,
like.
yes, Ras Beirut is a bubble. I belong to it, and you belong to it, and it's very different from everywhere else. And I would love the whole of the Middle East, مش بس the whole of Lebanon, to become like Ras Beirut.
Which implies that there is something that's the positive trait of secularism, that you would love the Middle East to look more like Ras Beirut. And do I
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think also Ras Beirut can only exist in because of the power sharing. You see, look at an old Ottoman city.
Yes.
You would walk in the marketplace or in the city, and you would have several languages, lots of different foods, lots of different clothes, different religions, different turbans, hats. You have a very cosmopolitan mix of people,
Sure.
from all over the empire. Kurds and Arabs and Christians and Albanians and Georgians and Armenians and
Yes.
Greeks and whatever. Yeah, everything. But in the evening, they can all go back to their quarters. So you have a typical Ottoman city or a Islamic city, if you like, or even I think it's a city of that era.
Yes.
You have a Jewish quarter, a Christian quarter, a Greek quarter, European quarter, and a Turkish quarter, and maybe a Kurdish one, and so people had secure boundaries.
But the Ottoman city, we all knew the other side. We all knew.
Yes. No, of course, I'm not idealizing it. I'm just saying that when things were, when people feel that their boundaries are protected, they stop becoming a threat to each other.
The Ras Beirut model.
The Ras Beirut model can only exist in peace when the environment it is in is also in peace and secure.
And emulating Ras Beirut in the region is almost impossible.
No, it's not impossible at all. So Ras Beirut is a Levantine phenomenon. It existed all over the region, but it got extinguished in all the region. So the phenomenon of people of huge diversity living in the same area without tension.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
that existed in the whole Ottoman Empire, in the cities where
This diverse breathing space.
So the diverse breathing space was there because people had at the same time the security of having their communal boundaries secure. Let's forget about this. Let's start from the beginning. Two people in the same office. Yeah, they could be friends and they could be enemies. One of the main factors of them becoming enemies is if they feel that they don't have secure boundaries, which means that they encroach on each other's jobs, job description or terms of reference.
So their positions are secure with or without each other?
No, if their positions are secure, then they can be friends.
Okay.
If their positions are, if there's an overlap in the positions and they feel that one is encroaching on the boundary of the other, then there's you have the beginning of tension.
That's interesting. So Ottoman city or a Ras Beirut-like area could only exist when everyone felt secure.
When everyone felt secure.
And it's
and it existed in every city. So in Smyrna, in Haifa, in Jaffa, in Aleppo, in Alexandria,
in Tripoli, up north. And
of course, yes. When you have secure boundaries, people can mix on an individual basis without much tension.
Secularism killed those secure boundaries?
Yeah, secularism replaced this. They replaced it with the state. So the state, which is a coercive entity, and it was a coercive entity in Ottoman times, I'm not saying it wasn't, replaced protected the individuals instead of the community protecting the individual.
There it is. So community space.
Yeah.
Community, not separation necessarily, but power sharing was the Ottoman model that worked best.
Yes. The Lebanese adaptation of that was to create secure boundaries. You have to go back to the writings of Michel Chiha, who basically translated the Ottoman model into a 20th century language, fooled the French into accepting.
So it's our fault.
It's our fault,
or it's his fault.
No, it's not his fault. It's his. It's to his credit. I mean, I think Lebanon is now, because Lebanon skipped the 20th century, it is ahead of everyone else. Because
that's funny. So
because think of it this way: what's happening in the region now is that there are revolts trying to dismantle a 20th century model. So, like in Syria, for example, in Syria they have to first dismantle the state. That's the first step. Second, they have to get used. They have to find a way of living without it, because the state has abolished everything else.
Yeah.
So they like, there's no private education. All education is state. So they have to find a way of living without the state if they're going to abolish it. And third, they have to find a way of living together, because that's not easy either. Yeah.
Right.
So we don't have a state to dismantle. We can live without the state very well.
That's true.
Because we have all our communal institutions.
Right.
And we have state institutions, but we're not totally dependent on them.
Yeah.
And we have, let's say, for better or for worse, a 60-year head start in trying to live together.
Compared to the region.
But
we don't have a great track record in living together.
Yeah, we do.
The 20th century was quite difficult.
No, it was mostly that of coexistence, except for certain periods where the order broke down when basically it was challenged by the 20th century model. So it could have won. It could have won.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the 20th century model could have won in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And we would have had some sort of version of the Ba'ath Party ruling us since the 1960s.
So there's a dichotomy for you. Going back to the original point of the conversation, it's really either some vicious form of tyranny, secularism, a la Ataturk, or it's something which is not very appealing either, Morsi, Erdogan, and that's the third option is going back to where before that line begins, before those two lines begin. It's going back to the Ottoman city, the cosmopolitan
to a much smaller governance model. Mm-hmm. Like instead of the big nation state, I think local administration and local communal services are far better. Localism,
localism, which implies a form of confessionalism.
Which could be.
Yeah.
In certain places it could be. In certain other places it couldn't, because each area has a different culture.
I've never had this conversation before. The persuasion to confessionalism, and I think there's one person that I remember changing his mind later in life, which is Kamal Salibi.
Yes.
I saw his Ikhraj Eid,
he has it framed in his house.
Framed, yes. Exactly. His birth certificate framed with his sect slashed.
Slashed, yes.
Right. And I may be wrong in this, but he changed his mind because he no longer believed in the model, which you're in effect describing.
Yes.
That power-sharing confessional model that we have.
Yeah.
He abandoned hope.
Yes.
But you still have hope in that model.
No, it's not. I mean, I don't have an absolute hope in one model, but in the same way, I don't have an absolute belief in a. So the secularists can be as dangerous as sectarians if they are. If they become bigoted secularists, very anti.
Yes, a bigoted sectarianist
and bigoted secularists are
the same bigots.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And good governance is what most people have been protesting about.
Yeah,
probably that more than the model itself, the infrastructure itself.
Well, I think they've been wrongly. Blaming the sectarian model, what they call the sectarian model, or the power-sharing model for all the problems.
So the bigots are
including the environment, including
all types of issues that affect all confessions.
Yeah.
Right.
Including electricity and water, and let's end it with this. Let me tell you something. There is a chapter in Ibn Khaldun in which he describes the relationship between the defeated and the victors. And he says that the defeated always idealize the victors and emulate them, and try to emulate them. And I think within civil society in Lebanon, there is a certain degree of Syria envy.
Syria envy?
Yes, in the sense that we have a feeling of failure because of the civil war. Our society failed, and we've been dominated by Syria.
I see.
And occupied by Syria. And Syria is a secular society which is a secular, socialist, strong army fighting for the causes. If you take what the so-called civil society in Lebanon really want, that's what they want. It's a kind of a it's a Syria envy without Bashar, maybe, but there is that element of feeling that we failed, and the model that has succeeded is that model. So when the whole region is trying to get rid of the model, we are trying to acquire it.
But we desperately pushed that model out of the country after the Civil War. It wasn't something that we were embracing. On the contrary. So, okay. So you think it's the religious it's the power sharing sectarian Lebanese that were pushing against that, and this secular civil society was embracing that model.
I think it is universally accepted in Lebanon that the secular model is the more politically correct to have. That no one in Lebanon will tell you now that they would defend what you are calling the sectarian model. Mm-hmm. So in effect, I mean, if you want, I am the real problem in Lebanon because everybody is secular. You know, Nabih Berri is secular, Walid Jumblat is secular, even Hassan Nasrallah is secular. You know,
but it's Nadim Shehadi.
So Nadim Shehadi is the only sectarian person in Lebanon.
That's teaching at a secular teaching secular values. You do. I mean, you're a product of. I know you might not call it its foundation. It's not secular, but you are in a secular institution.
You're part of secular. I am a secular person living in a secular area of Beirut.
So you're the real secularist defending the sectarian system, while it's the sectarianists who are defending the secular ideology.
You've got me lost here.
You are secular.
No,
in your private life, you are
tolerant. I am a liberal, tolerant person who thinks that the secularists can be as bigoted as the religious.
I'll give you that. Civil marriage. And I'd love to hear your take on that, because I know it's not a dominant issue in Lebanon, but it's an issue that it's a 20th century discussion. It lasted the full century. It lingers on in 2019. It's still being discussed. I had a civil marriage here in New York.
Yes.
That was an option that would some extra effort needed to remove my confession. And remove.
You did?
No, I did not. I did not.
But why did you have to do? Why did you?
No. My point was, if I wanted to do it in Lebanon, there's only one option, which is removing my sect from my birth certificate. Right. My wife removes hers.
Yes.
And we can wait in line for our civil marriage to be approved, if it would be approved down the road by the Ministry of Interior, which is a long shot anyway.
It is a long shot.
Yeah, and not many cases have been approved since it sort of became a little more fashionable in the last few years. Yes. The easier route
because it caused. I mean, there was a backlash from religious authorities and who opposed it.
Yes,
and the sort of consensus-driven mentality in Lebanon is to avoid such controversies,
right?
Especially when it's from one side, and I think it's from the wrong side. I mean, if you want to speak plainly and in a sectarian fashion, I think Christians should be more opposed to civil marriage than Muslims.
And you're speaking in numbers.
No. I'm speaking on theological grounds, because in Christianity, marriage is a sacred right. It's
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
like it's like baptism, and so baptism, marriage, and the when you die, the priest comes and gives you the final sort of pardon.
Yes.
These these are sacred rites. These are confession is a rite, and so is. I mean, there are so in Islam it's not sacred rite. In Islam it's a pure contract. There's no theological element in it, and it's a very flexible contract, meaning that you can have a very liberal, almost secular, Islamic
secular.
marriage. Almost secular.
Almost secular.
Yes.
But I, like many in Lebanon, prefer the civil marriage option.
I think you should have the freedom to take whatever you prefer.
But if I'm
Absolutely,
not mistaken,
you should not be forced to take any into any engagement you're not happy with, especially not marriage.
especially not marriage, right? But that requires me to leave the country.
Technically, yes.
Technically,
it doesn't. You don't have to, but
Well, I mean, it's either leaving the country or getting that marriage one day approved if I'm lucky, years and years from now.
yes.
Well,
I mean, there may come a time when you can get married online.
Oh yeah, well that's
in Cyprus, but I mean, I think the Cypriots benefit from.
They do, and don't you think that's a disservice to us that we're not if there's going to be breathing space among the communities, don't secularists also get to have their own breathing space while it's not dismantling the system?
It is dismantling the system.
Do you really think a
yeah.
civil marriage is a direct threat to
Yes.
the confessional
Absolutely.
power-sharing 20th century phenomenon that comes back from the 1860s?
No.
I mean,
You can't have both. You can't have both.
civil marriage is out of that orbit. We cannot allow for civil marriage unless we tear down the state.
Let me tell you, yes. Yeah, let me explain to you why. Yes? Because...
Do you have a secular marriage? A civil marriage?
Me? No. I got married in a church.
You got married in a church.
Yes.
Do you have friends that had civil marriage?
Yes.
Okay.
I have friends who... Yeah, of course, I have friends who have civil marriage. I have friends who converted to a third religion.
Okay,
Two
yes.
friends who were both non-Muslim and who both converted to Islam just for the marriage.
But they would have, I'm assuming they would have had a civil marriage had that been an option. That they did not.
Yes, it was the war, and they could have traveled to Cyprus.
So
but
converting to Islam for
was
liberal,
easier than traveling to Cyprus.
Yeah, and they probably did it out of convenience for a liberal contract.
They are both.
No,
They are both very secular.
right, so that's in a way that's almost too fringe because it doesn't.
It is too fringe.
It's not the power of the system.
But no. But you see, let me explain to you why a civil marriage can be dangerous. You see, religious marriages are a mixture of theology and tradition. Yeah, you can have the same theology applied in a very liberal manner.
Yes.
And you can have the same theology applied in a
Very
conservative, bigoted
Yes.
manner. Yes. It depends on the individual priests or the individual sheikhs. You know, you could go to a sheikh, and he could give you the exact terms of a civil marriage.
Right.
In a religious contract.
Right.
Marriage contract for the woman and the man to have an equal say in divorce. You can put conditions for alimony, for dowry, for child custody, for lots of things. You can go all the way. Yes. Now,
not all the way. You can go almost
all the way.
all the way.
Yeah. Except that when you get into trouble, you will be judged in a religious court
Right.
rather than in a civil court.
And I'm guessing that's why your friends converted to Islam out of
They did it out. They were eccentrics. Let's
eccentric.
put it this way.
But I'm sure that factored into the equation.
Well, what factored in the equation was that they considered that they converted to Sunni Islam, which in their eyes was the most
quote unquote liberal divorce settlement option.
or liberal marriage option, because you could put anything.
But that in itself means right. What is
Yeah.
it about
Yeah.
marriage?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. There
Right.
are. So let me tell you why civil marriage civil marriage law in Lebanon can be dangerous.
I don't like the can be. I prefer is dangerous.
Is
I like the assertion.
Okay,
yes.
let me tell you why it is. It's a danger.
It's the largest threat to Lebanese.
Biggest threat
to Lebanon.
to peace.
To peace. Yes.
Yeah. If you consider that the state cannot be your enemy. So if you want people to live in a under the authority of a state in peace together, they have to have protected boundaries, as I mentioned, and they have to think of the state as a neutral force, not controlled by any other group.
You are applying the communal protection a la Ottoman era to a contract among two people.
No. I'm now telling you about the state.
Oh, we're going back. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So this is not.
No, this is not. Yeah. Now, if you have a one single civil marriage code, a codified civil marriage law, it is impossible for it to be totally equidistant from all the canons and Sharia versions that exist in the country. So at the moment you have 18 separate laws in Lebanon for
I believe it's 15. It's less than 18.
Is it?
Yeah, I think there are
18 communities.
There are 18 communities, but yeah, there's slightly less marriage codes. But anyway, it's up there.
Is there?
I believe so. I'll double
Yes.
check on that, but I
Okay.
believe so. Yeah.
But anyway, you have 18 recognized communities.
Mm-hmm.
Each of them has their own religious courts for governing civil affairs, like marriage, divorce, inheritance, trusts,
All the
religious
above.
trusts,
Yes.
and all the above. Yeah, which is a continuation of the Ottoman system, if you like.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a civil law governing all these issues, for any of these communities not to feel that the state is against them, and this civil law has to be equidistant from all these laws.
Because civil marriage is not equidistant, it is a threat to
Then
all communities. And
No, then the state law will become favorable to some and antagonistic to others. So, for example, let's take a very simple example: inheritance. Yeah, in certain Sunni jurisprudence versus some Shia jurisprudence, there are differences in the inheritance law between men and women.
right.
So, if you are a man, if you are a man and you have 4 daughters, if you're Sunni, your male next of kin will inherit more than
Yes.
your daughters.
Yes.
If you are Shia, your daughters will inherit equally, which equates between genders in inheritance.
Yes.
It will be seen as a Shia law by the Sunnis.
Okay. I mean, I see. Yes, I see
see
that.
what I mean?
It
It will be more antagonistic to Sunnis than Shia. Now, in other issues, it may be more antagonistic to Shias. I'm just giving you one example of how.
But civil code, I believe, is implemented on most things in Lebanon anyway. So it's not
except personal status.
Except personal status.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
But if
the only other country that does that is Israel also.
And we're all lining up in Cyprus for
Yes,
our civil
exactly,
marriages.
yes.
But I guess my point is the yearning is there, and that I don't think necessarily pressures the state to behave differently. It only affords that option that for those that want it.
How does a state create a civil law in Lebanon?
How does any state create a civil law?
Through parliament.
So I see.
You have to create.
Yeah.
It's like, when we were trying to do an electoral law, you have to create a parliamentary commission, and in a country like Lebanon, the parliamentary commission will have to represent all the interests in the country.
Right.
And you will have to have religious people from all parts as having a say in it.
So because of the essence of the country, the confessional power sharing system that we have, anything that is encroaching on secular when it comes to personal status is impossible, because we will never have a unanimous agreement on an issue like that.
You can if you give the state total hegemony over the individual.
That's fascinating. Civil marriage implies total hegemony.
Civil marriage implies state. So civil marriage is not liberal.
Another great quote.
So if liberalism
if that is not liberal, what is liberal?
No. Let me. If liberalism includes the separation of church and state, yes. In Lebanon, you have liberalism would be the separation of churches and the state, because we have many churches.
Yes.
And a civil marriage would be the hegemony of the state over the churches, rather than the separation of the churches over the states. Or even worse, it will be the hegemony of the state over certain sects and not over more than others.
So the balancing act is more important than an individual
freedom. Because you still have your individual freedom.
Up to a point.
You have more individual freedom than anywhere else, in the sense that...
Than anywhere else?
Yes, let me explain to you why. Because you can get married in Cyprus and come back to Lebanon, and your marriage will be accepted. And if, God forbid, you have to divorce or whatever, the jurisdiction of your marriage will apply. So you will be divorced
on Cypriot
law.
Yes.
Now, if you scale this up...
But that means I'm leaving Lebanon.
No, this means that you can...
I'm going to another country to get...
That in the 21st century, where you can travel anywhere, you have a whole menu of... If you like Dutch law better than French law, or German
but couldn't
law
you also make the same argument?
Bavaria better than German law in Prussia or Saxony,
okay. So we're
if you'd rather go to Romania, you have the whole menu of legal systems that you can choose from.
You're absolutely right. You can apply for a visa, you can travel to any country, you can get a marriage there.
And in this day and age, there's nothing preventing an online marriage.
But that's not happened yet.
It's not happened.
Yeah.
It's not happened.
I mean, as far as I know, embassies, you can't just show up at the embassy and get married either.
No, so because no embassy would have the courage to do it.
Courage or without, I mean, it's just not there. It's not available.
Yeah.
But
technically, you can an embassy should be able to allocate a small room of 4 square meters where you could go in and get.
But you could have a ship. But you're encouraging Lebanese who, let's say, want anything that's not available to leave.
No, they don't have to leave. They can go and come
If
back.
you want better pay, you leave the country. If you want,
of course.
If you want to, if you want education abroad, you have to go if it's not available. There's a lot of things that people are leaving against their will, and people emigrate usually not for the right, they're not emigrating because the world is theirs and they can choose which country to benefit from. It's more because they don't have the option at home.
People are leaving, and they're leaving because the situation in the country is really bad, and they want to live. So, but it's not bad because of it's not going to get fully resolved if you become a secular country.
I'll give you that.
If you abolish.
Secularism will not solve all of Lebanon's problems.
Will not solve all of it. I think it will increase them. But I mean, you see, so for let's go back to the definition of what is liberalism. Liberalism means someone to be liberal, means someone to be tolerant, someone to be generous, someone to be accepting of others. It's been transformed into into secularism, but it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be secular.
You can be a religious liberal, and you can be a secular liberal, and you can be a religious bigot, and you can be a secular bigot.
That's true.
So they're separate issues. You see.
Yes.
So my main point is that what's important is not to stick to one set of ideas and take them to the extreme, to the point where you are intolerant of any others.
But am I taking it to an extreme? If I want to have what is afforded to me outside of the country in Lebanon, am I really taking it that far?
Like what?
Well, I mean,
civil marriage.
Oh, that's an easy example. Yeah, that's probably the most.
You are in a very privileged position in Lebanon because you can choose whatever country you want it to be afforded to you in, and apply those laws in Lebanon.
I don't know if that's really a luxury. If I just want a standard civil marriage in Lebanon, I don't know if the counterweight to that is, well, I have the whole world at my disposal. In other words, the numbers that do leave the country to get civil marriage are quite large.
No, but do they leave the country never to come back, or do they just hop over to Cyprus, 20-minute flight? You know, it's what people commute every day.
Well, I mean, boarding a plane, getting a visa, these things, paying for the expenses are quite high.
Still cheaper than getting married in Lebanon.
That's true. You're absolutely right. I'll give you that one. Des Sands versus Cyprus. But they still come back and do their celebrations anyway, so they're spending
if they can afford it, yeah.
But what I mean is, if the ultimate goal is to just...
Is it convenience, or is it ideology, or is it... What is it? Why do we need civil marriage? Is it because we are secularists who refuse?
It's a fundamental right.
No, it's not. No.
Not,
Liberty is a fundamental right. Choice is a fundamental right. Freedom of religion is a fundamental right. Secularism is not a fundamental right.
Should I want to have a marriage that is not dependent on any religious institution, I am forced to leave the country. I do not have that choice by default.
Yes.
Now, that's an inconvenience that maybe preserves the power-sharing system that we have, but are you certain of the implosion of the system should we start allowing that in the country?
I am not certain of anything. Okay, but let me point you to the dangers. Yes, two arguments for this. One of them, if you and I had the choice between a religious marriage and a civil marriage in Lebanon, knowing you and knowing me, we would both go to a civil marriage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we're not religious. Yeah. This means that the secular people would not opt for a religious marriage.
Correct.
Which means that only the very religious people would go to a religious marriage.
Yes.
Which means that the institutions of religious marriage will move to the right. You see,
they will attract the more conservative.
Yes.
Yes.
And you will create a larger rift between and you will decrease the chances of reform in the religious institutions.
So
you'll make them worse. So I agree with you that religious institutions are bad.
Mm-hmm.
Let's agree on that. But if a religious institution has to deal with people like you and with with religious bigots at the same time, they will become more liberal to accommodate the whole spectrum.
So you're
Whereas
asking,
if they only have to deal with religious bigots
yeah,
or religious people, and not all religious people are bigots. Some secularists are far more bigoted than the religious people.
Yes.
Believe me.
Mm-hmm.
So, if a religious authority has to accommodate a Roni Shatah and a Nadim Shehadi, as well as a very religious fundamentalist person or couple, then that religious authority will be far more liberal and tolerant and will be more flexible because it has to accommodate that spectrum.
Yes.
If all the Roni Shatahs and the Nadim Shehadis go to secular marriage, to a secular civil marriage in Lebanon, and only the religious people will, and then the religious authority and the religious system will become far more conservative and less tolerant and less liberal. That's one thing. But the other danger is the process. The process for creating such a law,
which we spoke about briefly, that we would never get there anyway because of the.
No, we could, or worse. I mean, success is worse than failure in this option because if you succeed, you will have such a diluted. If you need to accommodate all these people, all these laws, and make sure that they are all happy, you could probably end up with the worst possible law.
Which would be what?
Which would be a compromise between all the canons.
Right.
So you're either imposing a law on religion, you are infringing on religious freedom. Mm-hmm. You're telling people you're not allowed to practice your beliefs.
Right.
Or you're creating a religious, you're creating a secular law that clashes with certain religious authorities and maybe not with others, which means the state will no longer be a neutral body.
What you're asking for are the secularists to defend the sectarian system, because without us being part of it, the sectarian system becomes too sectarian. You're in a way, it's an obligation on our part to liberalize our respective religions through the religious courts, where you have liberal Sunni, liberal Shia, liberal Protestant, or whatever, that we are if we are not trusting that system, we are leaving it to the extremists.
Yes.
But is it really our obligation to defend?
No, it's not. I'm not asking you to be an activist reformer against the religious authorities. I'm saying that a wide spectrum, from the very secular to the fundamentalist, passing by the religious and the pious, which is not bad. I mean, I'm not saying pious people are bad. Yeah,
Right.
I am not pious, but
But you're bad. You're neither pious nor bad.
yeah, but you see what I mean?
Uh-huh.
So that religious authority will have to be more tolerant and more liberal in order to be able to deal with that wide spectrum.
But I would challenge you on a few assumptions.
Please do.
I think a secular society can accommodate diversity and pluralism, and I think a sectarian society can do the same, accommodate a secular strain.
Of course,
right.
yes.
And I don't think it's 100% either way.
Absolutely.
So-
No, I totally. This is not a challenge. I totally agree with you.
Well,
I totally agree.
So then
that-
why can't
that-
you let us have
and
a
that's
civil
my
marriage
definition
in Lebanon?
That's my definition of liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you can have a civil marriage in Lebanon, but you cannot have a civil law in Lebanon.
Well, at the moment, it's either one is impossible. I mean, the civil marriage option in the country is so complicated, and it's being
Yes.
it's being stunted anyway. So that is not available.
It's being stunted because of the opposition of the religious authorities. And because
Exactly.
of because politicians are not willing to confront the religious authorities.
But that goes back to my
exploit the loopholes in the system.
right, and it shouldn't be based on a loophole. It should be something that is available. My only point is, why can't the I don't know if ideology. I don't know if I would agree with that. That this is not an ideological battle against power sharing. I think,
is.
and
It is an ideological battle
if it's taken to the
against
extreme.
power sharing by people who are bigoted secular modernists,
But we're not-
who believe that
Say that again, just for that bigoted secularist modernist. Is that the? Yeah, it's fantastic. The secularists of the Middle East.
no, the ones in Europe are worse.
The ones in Europe are worse, so we're the good
Of
ones.
course,
We're the-
yeah.
No, but I don't know if it should be taken that far. We're not fascists. We're not demanding we're not pushing for an ideological war against the confessional power sharing. I think you can have both. And the numbers, your point is well taken that there is the choice. You just have to leave the country.
All right.
But that's a huge inconvenience, and
What's a huge inconvenience?
It's not just a commute. It's not a drive. It's not, you park your car, you get out, you sign and come. It's not
No,
that. We shouldn't have to leave to a third-party country.
In this day and age, you don't have to. In this day and age, you can do it online.
Can't do that yet.
No, but why don't you? Why
It's not available. It's not.
Why not?
Well, that's a different question. Maybe that's why.
Why not?
Online marriages have not. I mean, online voting is new. That
Yes.
hasn't become universal.
Okay.
Online marriage, I don't think exists anywhere.
No, but why doesn't it? Why don't you create an online marriage
You want
system and you become a billionaire tomorrow?
So the Lebanese
And you give
that
me-
want a civil marriage in Lebanon need to resort to the internet.
They can. I mean, we live in a globalized world.
Then can I push it further?
Yes.
Are we expected to demand everything we don't have in the country by just leaving the country?
What is it you don't have in the country?
You want a decent job? Well,
Yes.
it's easy. You go to the Gulf.
Absolutely. Yes.
I don't think that's right. I think
No,
that's
it's not.
Okay. You want a better education? You apply to universities in Europe or the States, Canada, and you
Yes.
leave.
Yeah.
And then chances are, if you can stay abroad, you stay abroad.
Yes, because of the conditions in Lebanon.
Right.
Yeah.
Why isn't civil marriage closer to that than an ideological struggle against power sharing? I want a secular certificate. I want a certificate that has no religious involvement. Why can't I do both? Acknowledge the power sharing structure.
Why do you want a certificate that has no ideological involvement, that has no religious involvement?
Maybe the same way I would want to live my life without religious intrusion, and that includes marriage.
But you see, you could live your life without religious intrusion
by leaving the country.
In a country like Lebanon now, because of the power sharing formula, because you can.
But in the most liberal contract, I would still need to have a sheikh and be part of that institution. If I want none of that.
Yes.
Could I respect the power sharing system and be afforded my secular marriage and not have an ideological battle?
By taking a plane to Cyprus.
That's what comes. Okay, well,
the system will tolerate the system. Mm-hmm. The system will tolerate any.
So either plane to Cyprus or online.
Yeah, online. I think
wedding.
Online would be amazing. I mean, if you create if Holland or Denmark or France create an online marriage system where the state will recognize it.
Would you have augmented reality also? Will we show up as our avatars?
Absolutely,
and
yes.
Can we choose who we marry at that moment as well? Can we? Well, but I think it comes back to.
I don't think it's such an inconvenience to fly to Cyprus.
But it is. It is. You're going to the airport and you're flying across the Mediterranean. You're leaving. You're not. Yes. You are. It's not as inconvenient as going somewhere else. That's true, but it shouldn't be Cyprus's benefit that we go there and we improve their economy, and we grant them hundreds, thousands of tourists every year.
Yes.
Not because we love Cyprus. We're not going there for their beaches or their history.
You could go anywhere. You could do it in any other country.
Well,
except Israel.
But they don't have for many reasons. For many reasons. Least of them is their civil marriage law.
No, because of their civil marriage law.
I understand, and the other problems that arise from that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, if you're willing to protect power sharing to its, as far as it goes in Lebanon.
I'm not protecting power sharing.
You're acknowledging its positive characteristics.
Yes.
And its history.
Yes.
And why it works, or why it worked.
Well, because I think what is failing now is the 20th century model of the secular, strong, sovereign, all-providing state is failing.
Would you put the American University of Beirut, or this one, Lebanese American University, would you put that within the sectarian, confessional, power-sharing history of the region? Or would you put that more on the secular?
Give me one single university which was established before the 20th century.
That's a good point.
That is not of religious origin.
And because of these missionary...
Not missionaries, no. Not just missionaries. Even in Europe. Harvard, Yale, all these universities were originally religious institutions. They were established by religious people. And
they've also been bastions of secularism.
Well, Protestant... you see, Protestantism is in a way, political Protestantism, if you like, is a secular ideology, because it is a separation of church and state. And
that is what these universities bring to the region, which is a belief in that, or at least that's an aspiration.
You know, the French universities, the French... also bring that, because they bring the kind of laïque mentality, which is the French secularist mentality, which.
But the French version, the French version of secularism, and
but there's something else we have to correct. Turkey is not a secular state.
True.
Turkey is a state where religion has been appropriated by the state. In the same way as Egypt appropriates religion, in the same way as Syria appropriates religion. So the institutions.
Again, though, these are not secular values.
So they call themselves secular.
Yes.
But they have their definition of what Islam is, including and they promote it and they co-opt the religious establishment.
But this is more like Ceausescu and the church, or Stalin and the church. That's not. No one turns to Romania of the 70s and 80s as the secular example. We don't look at Ceausescu as a secular leader. He was a despot, a cruel despot.
Yeah.
Stalin was a horrible figure. We don't look at him as sort of the champion of secular ideals.
So was Saddam Hussein.
And you name it, Hafiz, Bashar, Qaddafi, the whole list.
Exactly.
But these are not secularists. They're not champions of secular ideals. These are despots. You can have despots in religious institutions, like you said earlier.
Yes.
I mean, so I don't know if the line is that clear that you can just throw all of the secularists in one camp, and that's secularism.
I'm not saying that secularism that necessarily leads to despotism.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not inevitable. I'm saying that people who are calling for a civil marriage in Lebanon out of an ideological stance rather than because they cannot afford $200 to fly to Cyprus. And I assure you, most of them can.
It's more than 200. You're inviting your family. You want your immediate. You don't have to, but you usually want them. You want your immediate family. It's a few $1,000s.
Yeah, but in any case,
okay.
The campaigners, the people who are campaigning for it, are generally middle-class people who can afford it. I think a far more serious issue is the nationality issue, where a woman should be able to give her nationality to her children. I am totally for that,
because that does not confront power sharing.
No, because that's a question of civil rights, of human rights, of
you exclude civil marriage from civil rights, but you would include a woman's right.
Yeah, because the civil marriage is the imposition of a state hegemony over religious institutions.
That includes a country like the United States. So, yes. What is the alternative to before gay marriage was civil union?
Yes.
Would you be okay for that option in Lebanon, a civil union that does not intrude on God?
I personally,
I know I'm making this a bit subjective on your part, but I'm curious.
But some churches can accept it. There are liberal churches who would accept that too.
So a civil union is as far as you'd be willing to go in that case, in the Lebanese context, so long as there's no intrusion on religion and government.
So I don't want the state to infringe on the freedom of religion or to have hegemony over religious institutions, because it will drive them to extremes. My definition of the Arab Spring is a spring in terms of an
actual spring.
An actual spring, which is a metal coil.
Okay.
Yeah. So the more you press on a string, the more pressure you put on a string, the higher it will jump. And it's not a coincidence that the most fundamentalist movements have emerged from the most secular countries.
You're pushing down on that spring. You're pushing down against religious institutions.
Even fundamentalist Muslims in Lebanon are far more liberal than in any other places, because there's much less pressure.
But that's the argument of.
I mean, there's that famous story where when Khatami came to Lebanon, and he was with Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, and they walked in the street in Dahya, and he saw women wearing just little scarves or miniskirts or and he said, what's this? He told him. So Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah told him, this is Lebanon. You see? So even the most fundamentalist party has to be tolerant in Lebanon because of that.
I don't know if I would be able to follow you down that path where we're now. The secularist liberals need to turn to conversations between Nasrallah and Khatami to gain confidence in power sharing in institutions of the country.
I'm saying that even the extremists in Lebanon are more tolerant.
The extremists are more tolerant maybe because of what you described earlier, which is in itself the pluralism of the country.
Absolutely.
Has afforded
but
us.
You see, the pluralism of Lebanon is not exceptional. Every single other country, there is no country which is totally homogeneous.
Yes.
There are countries that are homogenized. I mean, if you look at Turkey, they're not all Turks, as they are led to believe. There are, the population is hugely diverse.
Sure.
And there are people from all sorts of. I mean, there are Kurds who are denied their being Kurdish. There are Alevis who are denied being Alevis. There are Armenians.
Arabs,
there are Arabs. There are. So the diversity is suppressed in Turkey.
The spring is therefore pushed to its limit.
And in Syria, the homogenizing ideology of the Ba'ath Party, which is Arab nationalist, which also suppressed all these, drove people to extremes.
So secular ideology pushes that spring a little too far for you.
Yeah. It's intolerant.
And a better version would be something like the Lebanese model.
Well, the Lebanese model is more of a separation of church and state than a secular model in France, let's say, because then you have the hegemony of the state over the church. When you have one single civil law, which you have no choice but to follow.
But the state you describe is quite horrific.
Which one?
This very oppressive state that takes up.
You mean France?
I think the description you give for a state is one of absolute control, and that's the moment you open the door to things that are too secular, you end up in a despotic situation. And France, the separation of church and state is not something that one thinks of maybe right away as an abusive, intolerant one that, curtails religion.
If you look at French history, there's been quite a few massacres to achieve that kind of hegemony of the state and that homogeneity. I mean, recently there's been the people have been digging up the some of the massacres in the Vendée and other places, and of course there is it's easy to say that we are homogeneous when you massacre all the Protestants and kick them out.
True.
And it's the same way in Turkey. It's easy to say you're homogeneous when you basically get rid of the Armenians and the Greeks and the Arabs, and you suppress all the rest.
I think it's a healthy way of looking all these things in perspective. Because sure, if you draw the line further down, then French history is brutal.
And European history is brutal.
Very
European
brutal.
history, they have achieved this ideal of homogeneity and cohesiveness through very bloody wars.
You're right, and the anomaly could be.
And the 20th century has been the 20th century ideal of secularism, homogeneity, and state sovereignty, and all that has caused a lot of hardship. I mean, there's been millions and millions of people forcibly moved. You know, think of Pakistan and India, because we have a mentality that we have to have a homogeneous state. They had to be separated. Think of Israel and Palestine.
Sure,
think
but
of Turkey and Greece.
But this is
think of
nationalism.
20 million Germans.
Sure, but that's nationalism in its most brutal.
Absolutely, that's
brutal
homogeneous nationalism.
And that's vastly different than wanting a civil marriage certificate. I don't think they link up that way.
They do, because you want a civil marriage certificate, not because you can't afford $200, because you don't want the state to acknowledge the diversity that exists within the population.
I don't know that's true. I would maybe disagree on that you can acknowledge the diversity and even appreciate the diversity, but you don't want the responsibility of liberalizing your own sect. You don't think it's your burden, where you shouldn't feel the pressure of either converting to get a better contract or to keep the majority liberal sheikh, whatever you would need to do to keep the conservatives at bay. I think it's more of it's a convenience, but not in the way you describe of, well, I can just go to Cyprus. I think it's a convenience of, I would rather not have any of that in my life. It's an irony that the liberal-minded Arab should be defending the old sectarian model in the 21st century against 20th century fanaticism and secularism. And I think that helps explain why the whole region is as complicated and messy as it is right now.
I don't think the region is complicated and messy. I think, for me, Washington is far more complicated than the whole Middle East.
I'll have to take you up on a different interview for that subject, something else we'll discuss later. Nadim, I really appreciate your time today. We talked from Ottoman liberalism to civil marriage in Lebanon, and we jumped around quite a bit. It was a fantastic conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nadim, at the end of the day, is a historian. He said it himself. He's not a social scientist. He's allergic to that term. And his rejection of civil marriage is particularly unusual among academics. And I found it to be a refreshing rejection, because I don't know anyone other than Nadim who is that adamant against civil marriage. I mean, among the religious establishment, sure, you expect it there. But I don't really associate myself with that. I associate myself with people like Nadim. And he said it himself. For the most part, he's on his own. What he sees as the danger of civil marriage. Which is why I thought, what better than to have someone supporting civil marriage in the following episode. And next week, we'll be discussing the merits of civil marriage with Abdullah Salam. Abdullah is an international lawyer currently based in New York. He recently had a civil marriage ceremony in Lebanon back in June. And he is currently pushing to have his civil marriage approved by the Ministry of Interior. So we'll see where that goes, and if there's any updates between now and next week, I'll be sure to include it. This week, we had Nadim Shehadi, a defender of the sectarian order and a skeptic of secular governance. Next week, a secular advocate, Abdullah Salam, who informally advised other civil marriage cases in Lebanon and is currently pushing for his own marriage to be approved. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.